Rolling.
RNegades.
Andre and I had this big idea.
Growing.
I had to have the people who didn't believe in me.
Between one day and the next, everything changed.
Nurses know how to solve shit.
RNegades.
Dr. Amie, part two.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Did you regain sanity? Did you?
Well, never all the way, but it's part of my my charm, my character, you know.
Uh-huh.
But at least I have enough sanity to conduct a podcast.
Well, there you go. That's all you need.
I think so. But you know, it doesn't really matter because you're kind of the star of the show, so I could just ask you questions. Actually, I'm sure you, as you know, like even on your worst day, if you're the least bit curious about people, it usually works out for the best because, you know, if you genuinely just want to know what makes somebody tick, then you can be off your game and just ask questions.
That's true.
For the people who haven't stalked you online, can you give us a little bit of what you would say about your background when you're not doing that cringy thing and sitting there listening while somebody, you know, does all their accolades for you?
That's so true. That's so funny. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, I mean, my background came from it. The reason I'm in this space is pain to purpose. And it was, I'll be really brief. It was back when I was competing in fitness and figure competitions, had done plenty of them. This one particular show I was doing started gaining weight, 10, 20, 25. Eventually, I believe it hit 40 extra pounds on my 5'2" frame. And with no reason. I was eating chicken, broccoli, asparagus, going to the gym twice a day. It didn't even make sense why that was happening. And I went to a total of 7 different doctors. 6 of them misdiagnosed me, told me I was normal, everything was fine, it's all in my head, eat less, exercise more. One of them pointed to some BMI chart. I'll never forget that. I'm like, are you kidding me? So it wasn't until the 7th doctor diagnosed me with hypothyroidism that I was super pumped. I'm like, yeah, okay, I have a name, right? You know, it's like now I have a diagnosis. I got a name and I got a pill. Well, she gave me Synthroid. And at the time, I mean, I didn't know any better. I left the office just pumped up that I had something that was maybe going to help me take this weight off, help with my energy, help with the hair loss, the whole thing. And I took it for 5 months and it didn't work. So I went back to her and I said, you know, I've been doing some Dr. Googling on my big ass Gateway computer at the time. And
Gateway! I had Gateway, yeah, with the cows.
The cows. And, you know, wait 10 minutes for dial up and all that. But no, I was doing my own searching, just like we do now at a much slower speed back then. And I went back to her and I said, you know, there's this thing called T3. And apparently what you gave me was T4, but the thyroid makes other hormones and T3's active, T4 is inactive. Like, just makes sense to me that these two work really well together. She says, I don't do that. That's not standard of care. And I said, well, I'm going to find somebody who does then. And, you know, when you are meant to take the next step and God, the universe keeps bringing you a name and like you hear something 3 times and you go, okay, that's fine. I'll call, right? I get it. I get the message. And so there was this doctor who was not even functional because we didn't even use that word back then. It was integrative. It was alternative. Right. So there was this guy, kept hearing his name, like, okay, I'll go see him. And he changed my life. He sat with me for 90 minutes. He went through all of my labs. He put me on the right medication. We combed through my supplements. Like we did everything the right way. And that's the point at which I changed my career. That's when I knew, and I was in the UPMC Pittsburgh major medical system. I mean, it's equivalent to, everybody knows Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic.
Yeah.
It's equivalent, right? And so you figure when you're in that kind of major system that you're going to get proper care. And I wasn't. It's not like I was in, you know, somewhere in the middle of Nebraska. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a major hub of medicine. And still could not find somebody who properly diagnosed me, much less properly treated me. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Wow. So when you sat for the 90 minutes with what kind of doctor? Like, what was his background? What was the expertise? Was it like an MD turned functional, even though functional wasn't like the term for it? Or
This guy had like 5 different degrees. So he started off as a PharmD, and then he got his doctorate in clinical nutrition. He was a doctor of naturopath, a naturopathic doctor. He had some other degree. I mean, I just remember seeing like 5 different degrees on the wall. And what was beautiful is he blended his PharmD kind of Western medicine knowledge
right.
with the integrative training and the nutrition and put that all together. I mean, essentially what he did for me back then, 25, 6, 7 years ago, is what I still do now. I sit with patients for 90 minutes. We comb through their labs. We order all the labs that need to be ordered. And we look at a person from that holistic perspective of, okay, we're not just going to throw a Band-Aid on you. We're not going to give you just an antidepressant. We're actually going to test and treat your thyroid, test and treat your hormones, look for insulin resistance. What's your lifestyle? What's your nutrition? And let's put that all together.
What did he, first of all, how old were you when this went down? Like when you started gaining weight, how long was it until you found somebody who would listen and get to root cause? In your mid-20s, you said?
Yeah, 20s, in my 20s, which is a little bit younger than what I normally see hypothyroidism being diagnosed. But since 95% of all hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's, and we know that Hashimoto's or any autoimmune condition is triggered by like a stressor. So we'll see it appear in pregnancy or after pregnancy. That's when a woman will say, it was after my second child that it all went to hell in a handbasket and all the weight started coming on. And then we'll see it again in perimenopause and menopause, which is why I've coined the term thyropause, because
interesting.
I literally give the definition of thyropause as the time at which your thyroid craps the bed after the age of 40 due to fluctuating hormones. So, right? It's any stressor, it's any fluctuation. And if you look at what I was doing to my body back then, I was way over dieting, way over exercising, and putting my body under really stressful conditions for 12 weeks at a time as I would prep for these bodybuilding shows. So that stressor, I believe, is what flipped my switch in my 20s a little bit earlier. But how long did I'm not a patient person, Karen. I probably waited like, I don't know, just a couple of months. I only gave that medication. I only gave T4 or 5 months. And then I was like, that's it. Time out. Nothing's happening. Unacceptable. I want to get out of this mess that I'm in. And that's when I really started doing my own research.
Don't you think that, like, in your experience, when you're working with clients, wait a second, you were in your 20s. Sorry, I'm sticking a pin in that for a second. Okay. So then you decided that this is what you want to do for the rest of your life. So what was it that made everything different from one day to the next? Where was it when you started seeing results, or was it just sitting with him for 90 minutes and going, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do because this isn't available?
Oh, that's a good question. A combination of both. I'm sure sitting with him and having someone finally, and I hear this from my patients too, someone's finally listening to me.
Yeah.
Someone is finally asking, and here's my rule of thumb that I tell my audience too. If a medical professional, whoever that is, does not ask you these 4 most important words, I want you to turn and walk out of their office. How do you feel? And he asked me that. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the first person in 7 doctors to ask me how I actually felt and care about my day-to-day life and care how it was affecting my quality of life. So that right there blew me out of the water. And then from there, after continuing with him, because obviously it's not just a one and done, we have to retest, we have to tweak, we have to adjust things. And as I continued working with him, I was so fascinated and just dove into, I would sit in on the consultations when he would do them with other patients, just so I could sit and absorb. And I loved it. And that's when he came to me. He's like, have you ever thought about like going back to school, getting your master's, getting your doctorate, like doing this as a career, going to get functional training? And that's when I started on that path, just changing career paths.
What did you go for? Like, what was your education trajectory?
Yeah, I went for I got my master's in clinical nutrition. Then I went to functional medicine training. So I got my functional medicine practitioner certification, then went for my doctorate in clinical nutrition. So I went in that order.
And you got to be your first case study.
I did.
Yeah.
I
So,
did.
and
Yeah.
yours was a bit extreme because it started so early. I mean, but as you're putting so much stress on your body, competitive fitness things, fitness modeling, so not only do you have the physical stress on your body to keep it in the shape it was in, but also when you're making that career, that must have been it must have been like a snowball effect because you also have the emotional and mental stress of, oh my gosh, I'm gaining weight and this is my livelihood, that there's such strict parameters to stay in this kind of shape at this kind of weight with this kind of energy.
Oh, girl. Yeah. I mean, you just nailed it. So it's funny. I think when we retell our stories, unless we're on a stage talking to a new audience, we tend to downplay. Just like I kind of went through my story really quickly in the beginning. Here's what happened. I was gaining weight, went to different doctors. But when you really pause and get to the feelings that occurred, there was there was embarrassment. I would wear sweatshirts to the gym. I would hear the whisperings of other people who had seen me compete before and who maybe were fellow competitors, like, oh, she's eating the donuts. She must not be sticking to her diet. So there was a lot of judgment. And so you had the frustration, you had the stress, you had the not knowing what the hell is going on with your body as it literally rebels against you. You had the embarrassment. You had and then layer the embarrassment of having to drop out. Like I knew I wasn't going to be able to compete. I was
Yeah.
carrying around an extra 40. I had to drop out of the show. So
And
there was
not
a
to
lot
mention,
of
it
layers.
takes so much. And I keep going back to the energy thing because it takes so much energy to do all those things. And I can imagine. So here's a hypothesis that I've, with your expertise, tell me if I'm on the right track, especially because I had eating disorder. I was riddled with eating disorders from the age of 11. Like I remember the day it started. I remember the day it ended, 11 to 37, with a measure of white knuckle control on the last third of it,
Yeah.
after I started having babies and whatever. It was just like, oh, I can't do this to my body anymore because now it's going to affect them. So it was like this, but it was always renting a warehouse in my head.
Mhm.
And the more I got into psychoneuroimmunology is kind of my wheelhouse. I publish research and stuff like that, but I've never really focused on the weight thing. But when you're waking up and before your feet hit the bed or hit the ground every morning, and you're like, oh my God, what's the scale going to say about my value and my worth? Oh, is that my back fat? Okay, I'm not going to eat all day. And then you're like, this algorithm. Okay, I'm going to skip breakfast and I'll have, oh, we have to go out for lunch. Oh no, we have to go out for dinner. Okay, I'm just not going to eat it. And it's like, it's all planning and it's all day long every day. That kind of chronic stress, cortisol. Cortisol releases glucose from the cells. Your blood sugar goes up, but because the body doesn't know that you're not actually going to fight a famine or build a shelter or whatever, blood sugar goes up, insulin is released, and insulin tells the body to store fat. So is that correct in a very layperson's way of explaining it? When you're so stressed out all day long, every day about your weight and how you look, it's like eating all day long. It's like storing fat all day long. Is that correct? Because I think it's almost like it flips the whole thing. Like if I worry about it more, then I'm going to lose weight. No, worrying about it so much all day long every day is what makes it impossible to come off.
Oh man. Oh, there's so much good to unpack there. So first of all, yeah,
I want to I want to kind of
Okay.
start that everybody can relate to, especially nurses, because you're stressed out probably about your body, about your family, and then at work, and then you get home. So tell us a little bit about the biochemistry and why it's kind of what you do kind of flips the conventional wisdom on its head.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers, especially, and I don't want to leave out the guys, but
Yeah.
as a woman, let's just face it, we're a little bit more cognizant and focused on our weight, how our clothes fit, how we feel, all of that. A guy could gain an extra 10 pounds. He's like, whatever, but we gain an extra 5 and we're freaking out. So, what I did competing wise back then absolutely set me up for disordered eating. I never had a full blown eating disorder, but I had disordered eating. And it goes to exactly what you said. You wake up and you start planning your day. You pre-pack your food, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to do the Sunday meal prep, pre-planning for the week thing, but it becomes a little bit orthorexic. It becomes obsessive. And that obsession, to your point, then spurs on cortisol, because that's literally what you're stressed out and thinking about all day long. So then we have that cortisol spike, we have the blood sugar, the insulin resistance that comes with it, the insulin resistance that comes with being hypothyroid anyways, and not being properly optimized, because since the thyroid is the master gland, it's going to have direct control over all hormones, including insulin. And that's where you'll see someone with a non-optimized thyroid who comes into your office and says, I'm eating keto, I'm eating carnivore, and you look at their A1C and it's a 5.9. You're like, but you're basically diabetic in the functional world here. And how is that? Well, it's because the thyroid is controlling it, as is stress, as is cortisol, as is that person obsessing about their weight and fasting too much one day and restricting too much one day and going on 5 different diets in the same week. All of that is stress. And so that's going to drive cortisol as well. So, I mean, really, after you saying that out loud, it also made me think like, well, gee, wonder why I was also diagnosed with PCOS a couple of years after I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. And, of course my hormones tanked. Of course I was insulin resistant. Yeah. Of course my period stopped, right? So it just all ties together.
Can you give us a little bit about like a 101 of that kind of cascade? Because there's so much to talk about. Like, where do we go from here? Actually, let's start with this.
Okay.
Because you were your first case study. And I think it's really fascinating to get to the root, like illustrate what it's like to have somebody go to root cause versus your TSH is high. So that means you're not producing enough thyroid hormone. So we're going to give you this pill, but you never get to the reason why the TSH was so high. So take yourself and what was the, when you sat with the doctor that you finally found for 90 minutes, and then he did all of the things, all of the kind of diagnostics that should be done. What did you both find, and what was the root cause of your issue?
Well, I mean, the root cause we didn't necessarily ever find, because it was just that trigger. So we know with all autoimmune conditions, it's that 3-legged stool analogy where you have the genetic predisposition, you have the leaky gut leg, which pretty much we all have. I mean, if you look back at what I was even eating back then, since we couldn't eat sugar, I was eating Splenda and Equal and Sweet and Low like it was I would buy those big 100 count boxes from Sam's Club, and I would be going through, and I'd have the pink, the blue, and the yellow. I mean, I consume so much
a rainbow of fruit flavors.
Artificial chemicals coming into my body, right? So we never really got to the necessarily root cause. But if I look back with the knowledge that I have now, number one, I have Epstein-Barr virus, which we know is a trigger. It's that underlying component that leads often to other autoimmune conditions, including Hashimoto's. So I had that. And quite frankly, I've never tested a person that doesn't have EBV at this point. They have some kind of, not necessarily active, but they have latent EBV. So we had that. You have the stressors that I was putting on myself by choice. And I think that was truly the root cause. I actually don't have genetics that I know of, a genetic predisposition for autoimmune. I know no one in my family that has an autoimmune condition. So it's hard to say what that actual root cause was. But the most important thing was how to treat it. So I had low free T3, and I had a slightly elevated reverse T3. So we went from Synthroid to Armour thyroid. And the armor at first, which I mean, you'll see with your patients, anytime you move someone from T4 only and give them a little bit of T3, it's like, woo, this is awesome, right? Like, yay, things are just a little bit different. But then over time, I started plateauing, flatlining, and not losing anymore, not improving. So that's when we did additional testing. And again, if I could go back and see my tests, that would be just gold. I don't remember the numbers at all. And of course, I didn't save them from that long ago. But because of the brilliance of my doctor that I was working with, he's like, I think that you might have a conversion problem. And what we're going to do is we're going to take you off the armor. We're going to put you on liothyronine. We're going to give you a little bit of levothyroxine or Synthroid. And we're going to see what happens. We're going to tweak that. And then we would do this thing. We'd experiment by pulling the T4. And I would get better. I mean, life would be, my brain would light up. I had energy. I was finally losing weight. Okay, now let's add it back in. 25 micrograms of T4. In 10 days, I would gain 10 pounds and literally become clinically depressed. I was in that place where, and I've experimented on myself
when you reintroduced the T4?
The T4, because I had such a conversion problem, which we know conventional medicine doesn't even acknowledge reverse T3 unless you're dying in the ICU or the ER. So I had a conversion problem. I had elevated reverse T3 anytime you added in T4, and my body would respond to it faster than my actual labs would. So my body would react and go hypo before that reverse T3 actually climbed high on the standard lab value range and went even above. So we like reverse T3 below a 12. Even if it went above a 12, by the time it went above a 12, I was literally clinically depressed and gaining weight. So again, the brilliance of my doctor, he goes, I think that you are T3 only. Well, back then we didn't have genetic testing like we do now. Mm-hmm. I just did a genetic test in the last couple of years that shows that I have a D101, D102 SNP, which if you have that, whether it's 1 copy, 2 copies, I don't even understand genetics. I have somebody on my team that does that, but it makes you basically a non-converter, or it tells you that you have that genetic propensity to not properly convert your T4 to T3 and to push up your reverse T3. And it actually was confirmed in the last couple of years, like, yes, this is what I thought all along, that it was something in my genes, because I did all the things to check conversion factors, vitamin D, magnesium, iodine, selenium, estrogen dominance, insulin resistance. I was doing all of those things to check those boxes per se, and I still wasn't converting properly. So my treatment journey was a little bit different, I would say, than most people. Now, I still have some patients that are T3 only, but it's like 10% maybe that truly, truly, truly require T3 only. And when you give them T4, they get worse. The rest are in the category of, yeah, you need T3. We know T4 only isn't going to work. You need T3, but then, how much, and just really tailoring that to the patient.
Okay. So really cool way to start. Obviously, your shizzle. After this worked for you and you went and got your master's in nutrition, and then you did your functional medicine training, how did you bring what you went through that made everything different from one day to the next? And then you embodied it for yourself, made yourself an expert. And then how did you take it to the people you take it to now? Did you just follow George's breadcrumbs?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I followed George's breadcrumbs, because even when I look back, and how you don't really realize you're being led when you're being led, but when you walk down the path and you look back at the path, you go, oh yeah, there was definitely guidance and pushing, to stay on the path. So I started with just a local office, and I would develop relationships with doctors locally where I lived who were open-minded. Now that meant there were like 2, in the entire town, there were like 2 that I would work with and develop a relationship with. And that way, when I would have patients that came in, because I couldn't prescribe, but I really, I wanted to be able to, and if I had the wherewithal to go all the way back and, become a doctor, become a prescribing NP, I absolutely would have. But the way it's worked out, I have no complaints. So I built these relationships with these prescribers that I knew were open-minded, so that when I would get someone in and a new person in, and we were sitting down going through their labs, I'm like, oh gosh, you're on T4 only. We really need to change this up. I would be able to refer them to this physician who I knew respected my knowledge and would be open-minded to prescribe the proper thyroid medication, because they wanted to learn as well. And they wanted to be a better practitioner to their patients. So that's where it started. And then COVID hit. And COVID opened up the borders for prescribing. And I had a nurse practitioner who was a dear friend, and she was all into it too. Like, she was diving into thyroid and hormones and all that. And she was able, for that period of time, to prescribe to all 50 states. And it's like, this is awesome. We can help so many people.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I was doing Facebook Lives and whatnot. One of my patients actually came to me and she says, you love to talk, you love to teach, you're doing these Facebook Lives. Why don't you do a podcast? And I was like, with what extra time would you like me to do a podcast? She goes, I'll figure it out for you. You just talk. Like, you just talk and record, and I'll do the edit. I'll figure it out. So literally, this woman was a teacher, no podcast background whatsoever, and figured out how to hell to take me and edit it and put it in a podcast and do an intro and an outro and ads and all that and push it out to the universe. So that was 2020. And it's gone strong ever since, because I love doing this. I love talking. I love interviewing. I love teaching.
So basically, she just listened to your expertise in the way that you could make it relatable and kind of take very complex information and make it understandable to your clients and her clients and, whoever, and said, right, dude, you got to tell the world.
Yeah, exactly. And then we saw the growth from that. The audience built, the growth built. Well, then, of course, the borders get shut down. You start losing the ability to prescribe across state lines. COVID's over. The powers that be are like, yeah, no, sorry, we're going to take that away. And so that's what lit the fire under my ass to build a team that can prescribe in all 50 states. Because I'm like, you know what? This is too important. This is too important across the board to be able to give people anywhere in the United States proper help. And they shouldn't have to, I want to say, even waste their time. They shouldn't have to waste their time traveling to Cleveland Clinic, traveling to Mayo Clinic, traveling to UPMC, Pittsburgh, and still being disappointed. And still, after all that travel and all that money and all that time, still leave with improper treatment. Like, no.
Yeah. Being given, yes, the standard of care, but the standard of care hasn't been good enough for decades, because there's so many, who knows what's in our food, what's in our lifestyle, what's in our minds and hearts that are triggering, like Hashimoto's 20 years ago. Do you think that was always, you said it's 95% of hypothyroidism is caused by Hashimoto's. You think that's new? Do you think it's just went undiagnosed, or do you think it's due to lifestyle and toxins and all that kind of?
All of the above.
Yeah.
All of it. So we're definitely seeing an increase in all autoimmune conditions because of the toxic environment that we're in, that hopefully maybe now with a new administration will change. More awareness will come to the general population, because as you know, everything that we're hearing right now, like, hey, there's fluoride in your water. Well, no crap. We've been saying that for 10 years.
I can hear you. Wait, I have to do something.
Okay.
My hair is just like, it's like so, I live in Southern California and it is so dry. And it's just like all of these flyaways keep tickling my cheek and it's driving me absolutely bonkers. So I'm just tying it up and I can look like a little boy.
No, you're good.
Okay,
there you go.
Now you don't have 5% of my brain tied behind my back, because it's like, okay, go, please continue. Hashimoto's, toxins, something's triggering it, but
yeah, I know. I think it's all of the above. I think right now we are gaining more awareness about the toxins that we are exposed to on a day-to-day basis, what our children are exposed to on a day-to-day basis. We're gaining more awareness of that. And with that awareness comes connecting the dots, like, oh yeah, okay, well, then if Hashimoto's is turned on by a trigger, whether it's a stressor like pregnancy, perimenopause, menopause, over exercising, over dieting, or toxin exposure, which is a stressor. If Hashimoto's is turned on by that, then yeah, we're going to see more, all autoimmune conditions. We're going to see more autoimmune. And then you add that layer on top of that, that most of the time, conventional medicine is not testing TPO and TGA. I've actually seen labs come back where they tested 1 out of 2 antibodies. Like, oh, okay, there's two. There's 2 that we need to test here. And the other components of that is, number one, Hashimoto's will often come back as a false negative. So you could test a person one day and their antibodies will be at 0 or very, very low. They will be deemed, okay, no, you do not have Hashimoto's. But then you test them a month later and now the antibodies are appearing and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's that? So they often come back as a false negative. And then the third and final component of that is how we look at those numbers. So again, I mean, this can layer over every test there is, but specifically with autoimmune and with Hashimoto's, we want it at 0. So that standard lab value range that doesn't actually flag you high until you're after a 34 antibodies. Well, what if you have 20? So I love using analogies. I use the analogies of soldiers when you have these autoimmune antibodies. And these soldiers, so specifically Hashimoto's, these soldiers are going out and they're attacking your thyroid gland. They're beating it up. What's the difference whether we have 35 soldiers and we can go, okay, Susie, now you have Hashimoto's, versus 20 soldiers that are still going out and beating up your thyroid? So I guess, okay, well, Suze, we're going to wait until you get 15 more soldiers and you're 10 pounds heavier and you literally can't even drag yourself off the couch and you're halfway bald. And then we'll give you that diagnosis.
Isn't that
of Hashimoto's?
Oh my gosh. Karen Martell, I was just talking to her and we were talking about menopause and how it's like, it's the same thing for thyroid. It's like, there is a problem. Come see me when your symptoms are so bad you can't stand it. Or even in menopause, it's like, come see me when you're not as suffering so much. Come back and see me because then you're probably through the woods. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. I know. Now, a patient asked me the other day, they're like, well, what menopausal symptoms did you have? I'm like, none, because I started on hormones as soon as my hormones dropped off the cliff. So in perimenopause, I brought them hormones in and they just carried me all the way through. So I haven't had any symptoms of menopause.
Yeah. If for anybody listening to this also and not seeing us both, like, it just hurts your brain looking at Dr. Amie Hornaman and going, oh, wait, you're through menopause. You definitely look like you're doing something right.
Well, thank you. I do have good lighting, but I do have good lighting and I get Botox. But no, I would say, absolutely, hormones give you life.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine even what my skin and hair would look like without hormones, much less, body composition, brain function, all of it.
Yes. So sticking to the common errors made by conventional medicine when diagnosing and treating thyroid issues, what are the most egregious that you see that anybody listening to this, like if they wanted, I love to give nurses tools for teaching, but also to give value to their patients. Like if they're, a clinical nurse and patient is on a new thyroid medicine or just had the dose change or something like that, being able to give them something else, even if they are constrained by the conventional medicine environment that they're in, for them to be able to give their patients resources, other places to go learn. Obviously, your podcast. What are the most common mistakes that you see conventional medicine making in the diagnosis and treatment of thyroid issues?
Yep. Okay. So number one, the most blatant is the testing. We know that conventional only tests TSH and maybe free T4. And those are actually the 2 tests that I really could care the less whether someone gets or not. Like, yeah, we'll test them. We'll look at it. It gives some data. Sure. Especially if the TSH is screaming, if it's above that 4.5 and you're actually flagged high, then obviously, okay, this person has Hashimoto, has hypothyroidism. We need to dig a little bit further. But doctors who only rely on, or practitioners that only rely on TSH and treat and diagnose based on that.
Yeah.
And that's really going to hurt people. I mean, I can't even tell you that is really going to hurt people. Number one, it's going to under-medicate many individuals, because I have seen countless TSH values that are actually between a 1 and a 4.5, and this person still has hypothyroidism. I have seen under a 1, like literally the TSH is slightly suppressed and they still have hypothyroidism. They're not being treated properly because we know that T4 only. So now I'll kind of weave that into the treatment because it's all tied together. So we have a stat from A4M that I heard years ago, and it really stuck with me because it's accurate. And I often get happy when I hear somebody else say a stat that I've been saying for a while. 2% of the population do well on, and that was literally the wording used, do well on T4 only. There's a whole other argument there. Like, what does do well on mean? Yeah. Is that person just happy carrying around 20 extra pounds and being tired? I don't know. So 2% do well on T4 only. I say 0%, but 2%. And then 98% need T4 and T3 or T3 only. So if you look at standard of care, 98% of people in conventional medicine going through standard of care are given T4 only. I mean, that's a shame. You're going to leave them with a lesser quality of life. You're going to leave them hypothyroid. And when you think about like, oh, well, we're covering our butts. We don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to do things that are outside of that standard of care model. But you took an oath to do no harm. How do we look at that statement? Isn't doing harm leaving someone in that hypo state where we know that the thyroid controls brain function? We know that it controls heart rate and blood pressure. We know that it controls metabolism, and probably one of the fastest ways to die is to have extra weight, is to be obese. Because with obesity comes, 35 comorbidities, right? That 10 of them can kill you. So isn't that still in that doing harm category? I would argue yes. So number one, we have to treat properly. Well, we have to, number one, test properly. So that's number one, actually. So you have to look at the free T3, the free T4, the reverse T3, and the antibodies. And that free T3 and reverse T3 are going to give you the biggest amount of information in those two lab values. Here's the thing. If they have Hashimoto's, you're not really going to treat them differently medication-wise. You're just going to lay down the hammer of, you have to be gluten-free. You got to control your stress. You have to do supportive nutrients to support your immune system. But when you're looking at that free T3 and reverse T3, that's what's giving you the data. That's what's giving you the direction of which way to go with this person. Yeah. And when it comes to thyroid treatment or thyroid hormone replacement, and I get this question a lot, like, well, what's your favorite one? And I go, the one that's going to work for you, and the combination that's going to work for you, and the dose that's going to work for you. Because, and this was a while ago, I gave a talk to integrative wellness physicians, and we talked about being in the Synthroid box. We talked about testing reverse T3 and the importance of that and what it gives us. And then we talked about being in the Synthroid box. And I said, why is it that if someone has depression and this antidepressant that you gave them doesn't work, you'll give them another one, and then you'll try a third one, and then you'll stack on Abilify, and then you'll give them a benzo, and you'll give them a sleeping pill. But someone comes in and goes, this Levo isn't working. And you go, well, that's all we can do. Yeah. We can raise your dose of Levo, but that's all we can do. And I'm like, no, there's Armour thyroid. There's compounded T4 and T3. There's liothyronine. We can put T3 with Armour. Did you know that? We can change the ratio of Armour by adding T3. Like, we can get really nuanced here, guys. I go, why? Why are we in the Synthroid box? And the one doc raises his hand and goes, that's all we've learned. Yeah. So we have to learn more then. And that's, the purpose of this is, and talking to medical professionals that truly want to help their patients. So you have to break outside the box and get really, really nuanced with your treatment of thyroid, because it is a nuanced art. And I will even go one more step further. And when you listen to my podcast, you'll hear me complain about this quite often. I even complain about the functional, integrative, and alternative practitioners out there that they only treat with NDT. They will only use Armour or NP thyroid. I'm like, well, you guys are just as bad as conventional then. Because what if that person doesn't convert and you're giving them 80% T4 and 20% T3, but you feel good about it because it's natural desiccated thyroid? I know you still have to tailor that treatment for that individual, whatever that looks like, and be open to the unique bio-individuality of each person. So I can even extend and start complaining about functional and integrative too, because they stay inside their NDT box and it's just,
yeah. But I love, even what you just went through, because any nurse who would like to be a more functional, I don't mean to, for lack of a better word, not funky, but a functional team member, to be able to, just recommend or mention or ask a prescribing doctor who's ordering some blood tests. You can still get reverse T3, the whole thyroid panel, mostly, you can ask for things to be ordered other than just a TSH level. You can bring in, like when I, back in my, when I was doing a lot of private patient advocacy work, I would do that research, go into the doctor's office with my patients, say, hey, can we try this? A lot of them were like, because you make them look good. So it's good for nurses to know, like, they don't have time to maybe listen to the podcast or don't have the passion or focus to do that, because especially the primary care doctors who are kind of handling a very broad spectrum of issues. A nurse that is knowledgeable about a comprehensive thyroid panel and more comprehensive thyroid treatment, when you come in, back it up by research, which I know on your podcast, you talk about the studies that say about Hashimoto's. There's also you got to go gluten-free. You got to, watch your stress levels. You got to watch what you're eating and how you're exercising and all those kinds of things. This is what's so great about your podcast, because it's bite sizes of information that you can not only be a resource for your patients, but also the doctors who are treating the patients, who want to do a better job. And 7-10 minutes with each patient, whatever, you don't have time to look at this stuff. But with a knowledgeable nurse, even with a little bit more breadth and a little bit more depth about the diagnosing and treating of thyroid issues, can be such a valuable team member to that doctor who got into medicine to heal. But a lot of times it's the nurse, and I know I'm putting on a lot on the nurses, but it makes me so excited for nurses to have access to your podcast library, to get this information and this knowledge in bite-sized doses, and then to go forth into the conventional medicine world and improve things from the ground up. It's like a grassroots thing, and it's
so good.
I don't know if I've said this to you before. A lot of times I do, but I see nurses as the white blood cells, the immune system for the sick system, because there's surface area wise, personnel wise, there's so many of us. And if an eighth of them knew what you know and could at least give their patients resources, can give their doctors resources, their healthcare team resources and knowledge, it could change the whole thing. And you just talked about 3 very simple things to look at. Hey, how about we look at the reverse T3 too? I mean, how about we kind of don't have a dogma of what the treatment is and use a little bit, not be afraid to use a little bit of this and a little bit of this. Why do you think that is, Amie? Why do you think, what is the fear? Do you think there's just not enough time for them to keep following up and saying those 4 magic words? How do you feel?
Yeah. I wish I had a strong, solid answer for that, because I get asked that a lot. My guess, just even from
just your
talking
opinion,
to colleagues,
your personal hypothesis of what you've observed in your experience.
So I think we can almost tie thyroid treatment slightly back to hormones in the Women's Health Initiative study. So if we look at the Women's Health Initiative study that was done as the largest, most expensive, most poorly done study to date, and how it scared doctors. It scared women. Women got their hormones ripped out of their hands because every doctor from that point on, every medical professional that read that study said hormones cause cancer, period. And that false information from the Women's Health Initiative study, despite the authors of the study coming out in, I think it was 2017, 18, saying, like, tail between their legs, basically saying, like, hey, we're sorry. Yeah, the data wasn't right at all. Hormones don't cause cancer. And we were using synthetic hormones. And we were starting them 10 years after menopause.
Yeah.
And we didn't look for pre-existing conditions. Oopsies. But still to this day, I could give you 10 out of 15 doctors that still believe that and are still giving that message to their patients. So I think with the thyroid, you know, we learned at some point of time, or it was taught that, well, T3 will cause, or suppress TSH rather, will cause AFib and osteoporosis. Now, we've had multiple experts come out since then. We have anecdotal evidence. I am one of the case studies that I'm on 150 micrograms of T3 only per day, have been for 20 years, and my DEXA is gorgeous. Like, I have no signs of bone loss, and I definitely don't have AFib. So we've already kind of dismantled that false thinking, but it still pervades. And it's still that false belief, which is why you have to continually educate yourself. Because if you stop, then you don't get this new information, and you're not able to change the way that you treat either, unless you get more information. And I think, you know, they're just not, these medical professionals are just not going out and obtaining new information to be better, to be a better practitioner for the patient. So I think it's just a lot of that. I think it's fear. I think it's the insurance companies. I think there's more to big pharma. Now, I heard this a while ago, and I'll tell you my counter argument to it, what I don't understand. But I heard the theory a long time ago, you know, the makers of Synthroid go into the med schools, donate a boatload of money and go, it's T4 only works, right? And they publish the papers, which we know papers are often biased. They publish the papers that, you know, T4 monotherapy is the way to go. That's all you need to do. And that's what doctors in med school are taught. So then they leave and they just go, okay, if TSH is above a 4.5, you give T4, that's it, call it a day. Good. My argument to that is, well, what about the makers of Cytomel? Can't they donate some so that we can get into these med schools and go, you know, T3 really is pretty damn cool and it really helps people. So I don't know if that is a legit answer or not. You know, that might be more of a conspiracy theory thing, but there's something, I mean, there's something blocking their minds from expanding, and I don't know what it is.
Well, yeah, usually it's the simplest explanation. That's the right one. I mean, I know but in this case, there's a lot of really simple explanations. I know whether it's money involved, whether it's laziness, whether it's just not enough time, but at least there's enough people like you who are kind of waking people up and getting this out there so that lay people, you know, like the general public can listen and learn and kind of. Do you see that happening? Because I see a lot in a lot of different areas. I see people are educating themselves. They're like you. Okay, this isn't working. And not just sitting there and complaining and being a victim, going, I know there's an answer. I'm not broken. Like having that fundamental belief inside, like my body's on my side. It must be trying to tell me something. Yeah. And just this T4 pill is not working, obviously. I'm in my mid-20s for you, and I can't see the rest of my life like this. And taking the bull by the horns, educating yourself, and now bringing it to millions of people. What are the positive things that you've seen since you've started educating the public and, you know, having clients yourselves, like in the last, I guess you said since COVID. So in like the last 5 years, what kind of groundswell changes? What are the things that you're seeing that are giving you hope?
Yeah, it was really, since COVID. So I've been in practice for 20 some years, but it was since COVID that it expanded and blew up with the podcast and the ability to prescribe all 50 states, all of that, building the team. But gosh, what I would say really moves me is when medical professionals listen to the podcast and respond to it and say that they're changing the way they are treating patients. And it's funny. I mean, we'll even have people, let's say, sign up for our program to become a patient, get treated. And, you know, on the referral, it'll be like my OBGYN or my physical therapist or, you know, that referred them, which means I don't even know this person, but this person, this medical professional is listening to the podcast and literally referring them to us. Or I'll hear stories of, you know, I went to my nurse practitioner and I started talking to her about what I learned on your podcast. And she started listening to your podcast and goes, oh my gosh, this is great. And now she's open to doing what I asked her to do. And now I'm feeling better. Those stories, like I know anybody that comes into the practice, we're going to help. What's really cool is the stories from the outside where
That
people
is
are becoming
awesome.
warriors for themselves and they're literally changing the minds of their own medical providers. And that's what we need. That's the revolution that we need across the board.
Yeah, it's happening. I mean, it really, like, just that there. I would love to hear, I mean, the win you had for yourself with the doctor that you first found was incredible. But with the simple things that you see going wrong, can you give us a couple examples, or even if it's just one, an example of a simple change that was made that totally made somebody's life different from one day to the next? Some things that stick out. So just to illustrate the power of correctly diagnosing and correctly treating a thyroid issue, even like a common, simple one.
Yeah. Well, to expand on what you just said there, actually diagnosing. So this would be that woman that comes into the practice. She's been told she's normal. Everything is fine. Nothing to worry about. All your labs are normal, right? And we test thoroughly and we do the testing that nobody's ever done on her, or we look at the testing differently than anyone has ever looked at because we're looking at it through a functional lens. And we know where she needs to be number wise on those labs to feel better. And then we also listen to her, obviously, with the symptoms. And one thing I always say too is George did not make us to be fat, frustrated, and tired. I mean, he didn't, you know, that's not how our bodies were made. So when you have a symptom, that's actually a gift and a sign that your body is giving you to look a little bit deeper, like something is off in the system here that we need to address. So just even that person seeing their symptoms change when you give them that diagnosis, when you say, hey, you know, there is something going on here, they go, oh, thank God. Oh, man. And just kind of like me.
Yeah.
Like I was like, yes, there's a name for what's going on with me. And I'm not crazy because these people are medically gaslit left and right. Like they're starting to think like they are literally batshit crazy. And it's all in their head.
Yeah.
And to give them that, like, you're not crazy. There's something in your labs that immediately ties back to how you feel after you answer that question. They're so relieved. It's like, it doesn't even matter.
I'm not crazy.
It doesn't even matter that they didn't lose a pound yet. They just have the hope now. And they just know that they're not crazy.
It's like the pathophysiological equivalent of when you know you paid a bill and you call up the company and they're like, well, it's not on my computer.
I know I made that. Right. I know I made that. Exactly.
We can round it off here. I think that kind of gives everybody a really good taste, a direction, you know, go to your podcast, start listening, start getting CE credit for educating yourself and educating your patients and educating the healthcare team that you work with. We're very excited to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. And, you know, just for anybody listening, it's blunt. It's straightforward talk. You know, I do not pull punches. I talk on the podcast like I'm talking here, like I would talk to anybody. Like, let's just lay it all out there. no fluff, no BS. Let's lay it out there and have a discussion. So if you're into that kind of straightforward talk, then you'll enjoy listening to the Thyroid Fixer podcast.
At your core, you're approachable, you're brilliant, you are a walking infomercial that what you're doing, what you did for yourself and what you're doing for other people works. You're like full of life and vitality. And if nurses, even before they start listening to your podcast, would like to give their patients or the doctors and their healthcare team that they work with, how do they get a hold of you? How do they refer to you? What's the best way?
Yeah, I mean, you can straight up email me directly at Dr. Amie Hornaman at gmail.com. Yeah, that's right. Dr. Amie Hornaman at gmail.com.
I love it.
I mean, you can go to the website. That's dramie.com, DRAMIE, of course, the podcast. So, I mean, you can give them my contact info and they can reach out.
It'll be in the notes.
Happy to. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to nurses being able to learn from you and your podcast and get CE credit. We're very excited for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon. RNegades.